Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Yoga Healer Real Life Show. It's Cate Stillman, your host, and I am thrilled to have Dr. Robert Svoboda here to talk about the history of Ayurveda. And for those who don't know Dr. Svoboda's work and his books, uh, check him out on Amazon. He was the first Westerner ever to graduate from a college of Ayurveda. It was great to see on your website your old pictures studying in India. When you were first over there. So for those who don't know his website, it's drsvoboda.com, drsvoboda.com. So I'd love for you to talk to our listeners who have just heard a lot about what Ayurveda is and some of the most basic principles about it. Is what about the history of Ayurveda from your perspective?
Well, and it will certainly be from my perspective, because there are plenty of people who have their own perspectives, and some of which they hold to very tenaciously. From my perspective, Ayurveda has been around for an indeterminate number of years, and as its name suggests, Ayurveda, Ayurveda. It was originally associated with the Vedas, and the Vedas are the oldest Veda is at least 4,000 years old, quite possibly 5,000 years old. And back at that time, of course, society was arranged very differently. The form of in which Ayurveda exists today, which is a form that was originally codified over a period between about 2,500 years ago and about 1,500 years ago, is a form that was specifically created for the purpose of dealing with people who were urbanized, who lived in cities and towns. In fact, if you look in the Charak Samhita, which is the most well-known of all the Sanskrit texts of Ayurveda, it says that there was a seminar regarding this question held in a forest to which all sorts of great experts attended. And that means that there either was a seminar, one seminar, or there were many seminars, or there were never any seminars. But what it means is that during a period of time that could have been a very brief and discrete period of time, but was almost certainly not brief and not discrete, experts got together and they discussed the problems inherent in living in an urban environment. And something that we all need to be alert to today, at a time when the majority of human beings around the world live in urban environments, and a sizable number of people, perhaps as many as 5% of the people on Earth, live in one of the almost 50 megacities, that is, cities that have 10 million or more people in their metropolitan areas. So, well before urbanization caught on, and urbanization, we've had cities on Earth for at least the past 5,000 years, and quite possibly there were cities even before then. But they were never places where the majority of people lived. The king was there, the priests were there, the merchants were there, the important things were there, but everybody else was in a much more unurbanized environment. And that's where Ayurveda developed. And from the way that it seems to me is, back at that time, Ayurveda was practiced much more like shamanic medicine is practiced, for example, in South America nowadays, that there were individuals who developed a a close and meaningful relationship with the non-human world, both the world of plants and animals and also the world of non-physical realities. And they would connect to those realities when a person was out of balance, and they would put that person back into balance with the natural world, particularly in the context of prana, chi, the life force, whatever you want to term it. A person who was unwell was out of balance with nature in general and the life force in particular. And that healer would then use his or her personal relationship with prana to help mirror that the prana in the patient, and help to recreate harmony that way. And that works very well for people who are, generally speaking, living more or less close to nature. Even in the past, when you had urban environments, people were still very close to nature. I mean, even when I was young, I was, I lived in small cities, but getting out into the countryside and to where there were wild animals and wild plants and wild reality was very easy. It's less easy nowadays. So what happened was, when there was this transition between living in close proximity to nature and living in close proximity to humans, there was a change in the way that the human organism elected to maintain itself. When you're surrounded by other people, there are benefits. And of course, in the world we live in, there is no benefit without a detriment also. And the benefit that, of course, was that there was easier communication and cooperation. And that's the way that, I mean, that's where the strength of human beings lie. We don't have impressive sense organs, compared to other animals. We can barely smell and hear, and we can see relatively well. We don't have impressive claws or impressive muscles compared even to chimpanzees, but we do have the ability to cooperate. So when we work together, we can get things done. So living in an environment around other humans, that allows for specialization of tasks to occur, that allows for people to work together and get things done. But good communication is also bad, also implies bad communication. And one part of bad communication is communicable diseases that get communicated from human to human. And we're seeing right now with this novel coronavirus that arose in China, but is being communicated all around the world, that diseases can be communicated very easily. And another thing, so that was one problem. Another problem was when you are in one area, as any kind of animal, you create a lot of waste products. And if you're in a city, those wastes tend to accumulate in the city. And if you yourself are in the city, they tend to accumulate inside your organism. So now what happens is, when you're in a city, you have a lot of waste products accumulating, you have a lot of toxic things being created and accumulating, and you have the potential for a lot of communicable diseases. And it's for this reason that there was that seminar that either happened or did not happen, or that group of seminars, or that a number of conversations that happened with these physicians, and that was reported in the Charaka Samhita. And the word Charaka means a wanderer. And that's what physicians originally did. They wandered around. They saw what other people were doing. They saw what animals were eating and not eating. They tested out plants. And they would use those plants on themselves in order to understand the plant and find out how it could be used for treatment. Very similar, in fact, to the way that in South America, if you go down to do something shamanic, you may go on a dieta. You will be assigned a particular plant, and you'll eat that plant all day long for several days until there's enough of the plant in you that the plant can speak to you, because you've been now impregnated with the plant. And all the evidence that I look at suggests that that's the way people were doing things. And of course, mantras were also employed. And if you look at the the Atharva Veda, and Ayurveda has always been traditionally regarded as the Upa Veda, the secondary or associate Veda to the Atharva Veda, the fourth of the four Vedas. You will find that there are a number of plants are mentioned, and a number of mantras are mentioned for specific diseases and for general well-being. And you see that that's the way that things were done. And as humans became more urbanized, more filled with ama, more toxic, and less connected to the life force, it became necessary for doctors to start directly interacting with humans, explaining what is the right thing to eat and the wrong thing to eat, the right kind of behavior, the wrong behavior, and helping them to get rid of this load of toxins and waste products and so on, so that the prana can work to heal them.
Bam. It brings up rewilding, right? Like how now we have a term for what happens when we have nature deficit disorder, and we're so disconnected from our environment that.
Indeed.
So if we're looking at like what's going on now with the popularization of yoga and Ayurveda, and people learning often from like a list of or working with a practitioner of like a list of things that are prescriptive to them. Maybe they're learning about their constitutions and whatnot. It's again, like what I'm hearing, what you're saying is that like we've gotten so far from knowing ourselves that we need someone to tell us about ourselves.
And I think that is a very useful thing to do, at least in the beginning, because yes, I mean, the average person really, and I think of myself, I mean, granted that I am not young anymore, but when I was a teenager, and that was 50 years ago now, I had only the vaguest idea of what was going on in my system, and I would eat whatever I wanted to, and I would consume whatever I wanted to, and I would do as I pleased, and that worked fine until I got very sick when I was transiting through Africa. And then I realized from practical experience that didn't work really well. So I think it is important for people to be provided with information that relates exactly to what is good for them, and until they're able to have enough perspective and enough purification to be able to sense that in themselves. However, humans have been sensing this in themselves for hundreds of thousands of years, and although many people are convinced they can't perceive what's going on within them, in fact, it is very possible for anyone to get a reasonable perspective on what's going on inside them, and to be able to feel in yourself whether something that's in front of you is something you should eat or should not eat, or perhaps you can get away with having a small amount, and or maybe you can't, and that applies to actions also. So I'm always a bit dismayed when people become listitarians, when they start to get get completely fanatic about what it says on the list they can eat and they can't eat, instead of testing these things out for themselves, finding out what those things do for them, and then understanding personally why certain things should be completely avoided, certain things are okay in small amounts, and certain things should be enthusiastically consumed.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to like the further we are from the plants that are or have been historically for humans just around us, and interacting with plants that are just around us, the further we get from that, the further we get from like what is our palate telling us, and how is our palate communicating with the rest of our digestive tract. And
Exactly.
what I've noticed from doing a lot of wild harvesting, and gardening and whatnot, is like in rewilding your palate, it changes your perspective of what nourishment is. It changes perspective of like what is life force, and how grounded a person can be just from feeling that nourishment is all around us. But I have a question about with the urbanization and the Amma, like the way back Amma 1500 years ago. Was it from overeating? Was it from needing to store food longer? What do you think the causes of it were? Or bacteria in food, or?
Partly, of course, it was from the fact that hygiene was, our ideas of hygiene were not ancient ideas of hygiene. Part of it was because of the fact that you really only have food surpluses if you can store them and protect them, and not only protect them from pests like rats and insects and so on, but also protect them from your neighbors who may decide that it's easier to take your food from you instead of make it themselves. And so food that has been stored for a long time often does pick up pathogens, like like in medieval Europe, grain that would get wet and then get mold on it would sometimes cause people to have what used to be called St. Anthony's fire, which is they would be overexposed to ergot and then suffer from ergotism, and ergot contained a primitive form of LSD, and so they were hallucinating all the time and having problems with their extremities and the blood flow there. And I mean, just from the fact that they were eating grain that was corrupted. So there is always a problem with stored food. And when you have stored food and you have access to it, you will always have a tendency to eat too much. In the past, it was only affluent people who could eat too much. Now it's everybody who can eat too much. And that's probably the main reason for the epidemic of obesity that's happening right now, because up until very recently, up until even, let's say, the end of World War II, 1950, 70 years ago, there simply wasn't that much spare food in the world. And now all around the world, there's plenty of spare food. And people, humans were not meant to have food available to them all the time. They were meant not to be grazing. They were meant to be having small amounts of food. And there was always, in every environment, a period of time when food was much less and you had to consume a lot less food because the environment was not providing it to you. And that allowed your system to purify itself automatically. That's not the case anymore. People can eat 24 hours a day. The lights are on 24 hours a day, potentially. There is no connection to the normal external cycles that allows your organism to align itself healthily with that reality.
Amen to that. Epidemic issues. So with the survival of a living wisdom tradition over thousands of years, like when you look at the history of Ayurveda, like what fascinates you about how it's moved through the ages, or where it go how it goes from past into present into future?
Well, I think the one thing that's not generally appreciated, even in India, is that there has never been one Ayurveda. There have always been, even in the classical Sanskritic tradition, there have always been differences, particularly according to the different regions and the differences in climate. And even today, people talk about Chavanaprasha, famous Ayurvedic rejuvenation remedy. And there are basically three major different recipes for Chyavanprash in India, one from Charak, one from the Ashtanga Hridayam, and one from the Sharangara Samhita. And these reflect three very different approaches to the not only the preparation, but how that preparation would be employed according to the climate. So in the case of Chyavanprash, for example, the main ingredient is amalaki. The best and the biggest and the best looking amalakis come from the places like the area, the so-called Doab, the area where the Ganga and the Yamuna flow. And so quite naturally, if you are in a place where the amlas are much smaller and they have different qualities, you're going to make a different kind of product than you will if you're in a place where there's more of that. And that applies to any of the preparations and to any of the different ways of interacting with people and using things. So the reality is that even today, many Ayurvedic physicians in South India think that the Ayurveda in North India has been highly corrupted by other external influences. And many of the Ayurvedic physicians in North India think that the Ayurveda in the South has been insufficiently altered to address its evolution over the centuries, and that it is much too limited and much too specific to the South only. So, and that has nothing, and if we leave that aside, there have always been other traditions. One that is dying out, sadly, is they call in Maharashtra Adzita Bhatva, which means grandmother's purse. So your grandmother would have a purse filled with herbs hanging on a peg somewhere, and then she would teach her daughter or daughter-in-law how to use those herbs to treat the children. And so there was that sort of lineage going on. There was a lineage of Ayurveda that yogis and swamis and sadhus would teach to their disciples, so that when they were out in the middle of nowhere, they could take care of themselves. There were traditions of very specific treatments. And even today, there are a couple of places in India where, for example, bone setting is and treatment of fractures is very specific, and often fractures that don't heal, even using very fancy modern methods, will heal when they're used when these specific traditional uses or methods are employed. So there are many different traditions of Ayurveda. There are many different ways of looking at it, and I think that's very important, especially because many people nowadays say, no, this is the way that Ayurveda is, and they try to convince people that there is only one way, when in fact there are more ways than one.
And what are you seeing with how it's moving into Westernization and into the future?
Well, at the moment, of course, the main reason that people pay attention to Ayurveda is because of trying to figure out what your constitution is so you can find out what you can binge on and what you can't binge on, and the use of Ayurveda for spa treatments. And I think these are both useful things, but it would be unfortunate if people become so focused on these two things that they overlook the much bigger and more substantial message that Ayurveda has to offer, which is that it's a method of examining your life to find out what works and what doesn't work, and to encourage you to employ more of what works and avoid what doesn't. I mean, in Charaka, that's the definition of Ayurveda. Hita hitam sukham dukkam is how that verse begins, and that means hita means what benefits, ahita means what detriments, sukha and dukkha. Sukha means health, but it also means happiness. It also means literally, it means good space. So you want to have a sense that the space element is in good harmony all throughout you. And if space is in good harmony, then automatically all the other elements are going to have a chance to be in harmony, because it's only in space that can be harmonious.
Awesome. Thank you so much for spending some time with us talking about history of Ayurveda. I'm sure our listeners really appreciate your time and coming on the show.
Good to talk to you.